I mean, these models are incredible, and there's lots of times I ask them things and they do stuff, and I'm like, I could never do that. Like this thing's way the hell smarter than I am. But the interesting thing is where they're really dumb is learning.
Right. Mhm.
Like real time learning,
Yeah, yeah.
like I can spend an hour to let's look at the coding case, but extrapolate it to any other case, right? I can spend an hour today working with a coding agent and it can pull off something incredible. And we learn things along the way through this session. And the next day I start a new session and it's a dumbass that didn't learn anything from the 2 hour session I had today unless
Right,
unless
right.
there's some scaffolding, right? And there's a
That's
little
right.
bit of scaffolding improving to try to extract out like what were the key lessons. Let's get them done. Let's move them forward. And that kind of goes, and then extract that into business processes where you have
Mhm.
where that's about my business, right? Well, we do it this way, right? You need to Right? Like, you need to do this. Don't ever forget about this. Look, this one customer is always, a outlier in this area. So don't like treat it different in this situation under this thing. And that's really, I think, where these models require a lot of scaffolding to
Mhm.
do really good business. And that scaffolding is about kind of like that knowledge you would give an employee and the employee would intuit and just remember, for the next 7 years. You got to really embed so that every time you start a session, we're able to ingest all of that knowledge
Just
again.
really quick, and I know I can tell Shanti wants to hop in. It just cracks me up, just as a technologist, how many times we've fallen for the allure of stateless solutions, only to realize we really need stateful solutions. I think I've seen it now 4 times repeated in my career, starting with sessionless entity beans. Anyway, it just keeps repeating, right? Because you're right, business context isn't a snapshot; it's a continued dialogue. And so, Shanti, I know I interrupted you, but I just mentioned
I
that.
I was thinking about, the stack of, you've got folks that can like build chips and then assemble them into useful processors, and then you've got LLM creators that are actually building models on top of that, and then people wrapping applications on that. And we've already seen that the LLM providers are starting to subsume some of that application layer, whether it's Gemini or Google with anti-gravity.
Hmm.
OpenAI was making a play for both Cursor and Windsurf at different points in time, because you see who the users are, and there's no reason they can't build that same thing. In fact, they can vibe code a lot of it. They've got a really good model behind them, and they can do a lot of these things. So we're seeing that come down. Like, oh, if your application doesn't do something really special around those models or string together the best parts of different ones, one of those model providers can just start taking over some of that business. Now, where it gets more interesting is that, okay, well, what are those model providers doing that nobody else can do? Well, right now, they've got a ton of compute, right? They've already invested in these huge GPU farms. If you're Nvidia, is there anything that's preventing you from being like, maybe I want to be a model provider? I have all the GPUs. Maybe I don't give them to anybody else and I become the main
Hmm.
source for that. And then you look at, well, who gets to compete in that market? Is it, okay, Nvidia and AMD
I
can
have
do
to
it,
ask, Shanti. I have to
Samsung can
ask,
do it.
is that your 2026 prediction that Nvidia?
I don't think they'll do it by 2026, but if you told me by 2030, chip makers are like, you know what? Why should we let everybody else enjoy all of this money and don't do it ourselves? But Google invests in TPUs, and you've seen Microsoft wants to design their own chip. AWS is designing their own chip. I think some of that is to protect themselves against, hey, we don't want to be fully dependent. And if these guys come and try to take our lunch and they want to be the model providers, maybe they have something they can compete with.